Let's go.
I tried to cover my shine. I've tried staying in the lines. I don't wanna hide. No, not tonight. You want me to take my lights, fit it in your box, right? I want you to look me in the eye. Ready or not, here I come. I'm about to show you where the light comes from. Oh, ready or not, here I come. This is who I am, I won't hide it. I'ma take it all over the world. To the young, to the old, every boy and girl. Ready or not, here I come. I'ma show the world where the love is, where the love is, where the love is, where the love is, where the love is. Ready or not, ready or not, where the love is, where the love is, where the love is, where the love is. Ready or not, I'm not ever selling out. Love out loud is what it's all about. Giving everything to see the lost get found. Yeah, it's going down. You want me to take my lights, fit it in your box, right? I want you to look me in the eye. Ready or not, here I come. I'm about to show you where the light comes from. Oh, ready or not, here I come. This is who I am, I won't hide it. I'ma take it all over the world. To the young, to the old, every boy and girl. Ready or not, here I come. I'ma show the world where the love is.
I refuse to keep this buried deep inside of me. Yeah, this little light of mine, it's time to let it shine a bit. Cause there's no point in hiding it. It's everything I am. The source of all my hope, and it's the reason why I stand. I pledge allegiance to being somebody real. There's no more holding it back. I'm showing them how I feel.
Good morning. I'm Dave. I'm one of the GC leaders here at the Well. We'd like to welcome you to service this morning. I'd like to share a passage with you folks. It's going to be John 18, 10, and 11. Now to kind of set this up, this is where Judas has kind of betrayed Jesus, and brought those folks in, and Christ is standing there with the disciples, and the verse 10 starts out, then Simon Peter, having his sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut his ear. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? How often do we think we are right and jump into something with all that we have? If we were to be more Christ-like, we have to give up our impulses. Christ didn't come to earth to overthrow. He came to overcome by yielding to the plan, to his Father's plan of sacrifice and bring us salvation. One of the things that I have to do is, like Peter, slow down and just don't go off half-cocked. You know, it's, oh, hey, this is here, and boom, oh boy. I should have waited on that. Thanks so much to Christ that he's there to forgive me and direct me in a way that's going to glorify him. So let's pray. Father, forgive us when we think we know better than you how to live our lives and battle Satan. Thank you for sending your Son to show us how to serve others and die for our sins on the cross so we can be redeemed. We just invite you in, and please be with us as we worship you, and be with the kids and the leaders down in nursery and later as we go into kids' church. Just be with the worship team and just speak through them and help us just to open our hearts and our voices to sing praise to you this morning. We thank you so much for helping to we thank you so much for redeeming us through your sacrifice. In your name, amen. I'd like to invite everybody to stand and let's worship.
Firm foundation, a rock, the only solid ground. As nations rise and fall, kingdoms once strong now shaken, we trust forever in your name, name of Jesus. We trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Unmatched in all your wisdom, in love and justice you will reign, and every knee will bow. We bring our expectations, our hope is anchored in your name, name of Jesus. Oh, we trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You all awake yet? Good morning, church. Welcome to the Well. How are you all doing today? Okay. I asked you a question. How are you all doing today? Awesome. Yeah! That's better. This next song is a really good dancing song, so let's dance, church. In tenderness he sought me, weary and sick with sin, and on his shoulders brought me back to his fold again. While angels in his presence sang, until the courts of heaven rang. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of God. He died for me while I was sinning, needy and poor and blind. He whispered to assure me, I found thee, thou art mine. I never heard a sweeter voice. It made my aching heart rejoice. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the love that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of God. Upon his grace I'll daily ponder and sing anew his praise. With all adoring wonder, his blessings I retrace. It seems as if eternal days are far too short to sing his praise. Oh, the love that bought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of God. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Your turn.
Again, good morning, right? Amen. In Matthew 19:26, it says, "But Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." So God, this morning, I just thank you so much. And as we enter into a slower time of worship, God, maybe realize that, God, I can't do anything by myself. When I take things in my own hands, things can tend to go into a downward spiral. So God, I just thank you so much for your grace and your mercy. So God, may we just trust in you and may we worship you with our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Better do that first. There we go.
Alone in my sorrow and dead in my sin. Lost without hope, no place to begin. A love made a way to let mercy come in. Death was arrested, my light began. Ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. My orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. Death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace, so free, washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. Shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. Death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. A Savior displayed on a criminal's cross. Darkness rejoiced as though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless You have made us new, now life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began. When death was arrested, my life began. When death was arrested, my life began.
God, we just thank you so much. Thank you so much that you arrested death. You have set us free because of that. God, death no longer holds us, but God, you have the keys in your hand. So God, thank you so much. God, we praise you and we worship you this morning. And God, how great are you? We cannot fathom your greatness. So God, as we sing this next song, God, we just realize that God, you are in control. And God, the greatness of you cannot be put into words. So God, we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will sing, how great is our God. Age to age he stands, time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will sing, how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. Great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will sing how great is our God. How great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will sing how great is our
Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for being able to provide us with music and song that we can praise you with. Thank you so much for those words of, praise that we can just take with us no matter where we go. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning and helping energize this room. As we transition to the sermon part of a service, we just ask that you open our ears, minds, and hearts to what you speak through Joe, and just be here with us and lay on our hearts the words you want us to hear. Your name, amen. Wow. Was that not one of the most energetic music worship sessions that we've had in quite a while? That was awesome. Joe, how are you going to follow that one up? Man, that was just awesome. Whew. All right, some announcements. Connect cards and first impression surveys are back there now? Or are they in the lobby, out in the table? Please fill those out so we can, if you're new, get to know you, and if you have anything that you would like to suggest or, have concerns about, then we could also address that too. Special announcements. The only one that I've been told is July 13th at 8 a.m. will be the men's group or the men's gathering. That is a Saturday. So, and we're being taken through a series by Chris Shade, and Joe and Micah are also leading us in that. So come on down. I'd say visited GC, but we're on hiatus till this fall. A little bit of a financial update. In May, we had family giving of about $5,700. So far in June, we've got a little over $2,100. Our monthly expenses in May was $8,100. Our expenses so far in June have been $6,400. Now, the difference between that made up from some outside folks, but that's not always going to be there. We've come a long ways, and we've got just a little bit more to go, and then we'll be self-sustaining, and then also be able to help give money out. So it's like came so far. Awesome that we are on this path. Sustainability would look like 40 families or individuals given about $188 a month. In May, 30 families gave, and so far in June, we've had 22 families give. So please keep that in mind and do whatever God lays on your heart to help give. How we can give is, we're going to do this slide first. Okay. We are doing some giving already through some other church planting stuff. So far, since we started this, we've given a little bit over $3,000 to church planting. 300 of that has gone to Acts 29, almost 1,200 to Converge, and then we've given almost 1,200 to the Southern Baptist Convention, or the SBC. And then we have the missionaries, Lee and Regina Block, or Block, which we have given just a little over 400 so far. And with Lee and Regina, that's solely on other donations. That doesn't come out of our regular budget. So if you can give more than you usually do for like the offering and stuff, or you've pledged to put funds into that, please make sure that if that money doesn't come in, they don't get what we've pledged. So far, I believe we've pledged 200 a month, 200 and something, almost 250. So, and I believe now we're going to talk about how to give. We have the two giving boxes, one here on the wall, and then our trusty old giving box in the back. Just fill your stuff out, put it in an envelope. That's between you and the Lord. And you can also go online to give, and that is at thewellhastings.com/give. Right now, kids 5 to 12 will be dismissed for Kids Church. Miss Eileen and Mr. Abe are back there, and they will take you all down to Kids Church. So I'd like to turn it over to Joe.
It's cool to have a remote up here for the lights. Oh, what? Oh. It's kind of funny, like one little pink light up there. Grab your Bibles, turn to the book of 1 Timothy. It does feel weird having a remote for the lights in the pulpit with me, but it is nice to have. 1 Timothy chapter 6, where we're going to be today. We'll be in verses 17 through 21. This is our last week in Timothy. Yep, this is it. We are done after this, closing up shop, and no, I'm kidding. I'm stoked, though, to preach this sermon, and at the same time, we'll admit that it has been a week. It's been a week. It's been a certain kind of a week. In many ways, my heart is tired and worn and distracted, and I imagine that some of you coming in today might be in the same place too. And my hope and my prayer is that God would give us a final word out of 1 Timothy that would encourage us and challenge us and strengthen us all at the same time. So if you would, follow along with me. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 to 21. Paul says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. O Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, for by professing it some have swerved from the faith." Grace be with you. Father, I ask that you would come now in maybe just a special way. I ask that you would come and open our hearts to what you would say to us through your word. I ask that you would come and do what I am unable to do, which is to speak your word boldly and courageously and truthfully if it weren't for your spirit at work. And so just ask, Father, that your spirit would be at work, that you would purify the motivations of my heart, that you would apply once again the shed blood and the broken body of Jesus over my heart as I preach, that you would take my words, make them yours, and that you would do that not only for me, but for all of us in this room. God, I pray that you would take this final word from 1 Timothy and apply it to our hearts this morning. And I ask, Father, that you would set us free through the preaching of the gospel, that you would set us free from our sin, that you would set us free from what seeks to enslave us, that you would set us free from what hinders us. Pray, Father, that you would come now and do all of those things. And I pray this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. So these last 5 verses of this letter that I've just read are basically a postscript, okay, to the main body of the letter. The reality for this letter that we've studied is that the main body of that letter most likely ended last week. So if you can envision the sermon from last week, the very end of that sermon and those verses was verses 15 through 16. Basically, Paul's big benediction, his big description of God. So that seemed to be kind of the pinnacle. Like Paul just kind of ended the letter on a real big upswing. And then it appears to, I think, to most scholars that these last few verses are a postscript. And he went back and read his letter to Timothy, and being that he didn't live in the time of typewriters and computers where you could go back and insert a paragraph, he realized that there was something he hadn't dealt with fully. He has talked about our wealth and our riches a little bit in the letter, but must have felt that he hadn't addressed it enough, and so writes this final postscript, which in some regards to me, even as I studied it, kind of felt like, kind of felt a little bit of a downturn as I read it. Not that God's word isn't important. You just get this big like crescendo or whatever you would call that of Paul's description of God last week, and then you go into this. So my prayer, though, still is that as we study this postscript, that that God would do a work in our hearts and that he would reveal Christ to us in a way that maybe we hadn't thought of him. And what I want you to start off noticing in these verses is the way that Paul uses his words. I've talked about this often. Paul uses his words very intentionally under the inspiration of the Spirit. But in these verses, he uses the word for wealth, or the word for rich, or the word for riches at least 4 times, right? So you might look back at it with me. You're looking in verse 17, and I think in 18. He uses it 4 times, and he uses it 4 different ways too. So the first time that you see the word pop up here is as an adjective, okay? Trumpets were sounding. Maybe Jesus was coming back. Wow, is that today? Thank you, Jesus. We'll let him preach this message. So, wasn't in the special announcement, sorry. So you see this word for riches or wealth, the rich, show up 4 different ways, 4 times. First time as an adjective, okay? When he says, as for the rich in this present age, it's an adjective, it's describing. The second time this word shows up is as a noun. When he says, urge them not to set hopes on the uncertainty of what? Riches. That's a noun. Some place or thing. Third time shows up as an adverb, describing an action. It says, charge them, set their hope on God who richly provides. Not just provides, but richly provides. The final time you see this word show up in these verses is as a verb, okay? Be rich in good works. Now, I might have lost many of you who barely made it through English class just like me in all of this analytical dissection, but there is something important here. What we have here in these verses with those different usages of the word wealth or riches is we have a description of a kind of a person, right? So you might ask yourself, what word would describe me? Take this thing down or up? What do you want me to do, Bryce? The first thing we have then is we have a description of a kind of a person. So what kind of a person are you? We have the subject of something that is untrustworthy, right? Riches. We have the description of God's actions towards us, the way that he behaves towards us. Then we have a description of how we are called to behave towards others. So you see those 4 different uses of the word. So what the Apostle Paul is doing here is he's just basically utilizing some awesome wordplay in regards to wealthy people, in regards to wealth itself, in regards to the character of God, and in regards to how we are called to live in light of all that. He uses all of that wordplay to get his point across. So at this point, you might be asking, what's his point? Is his point really nouns and adjectives and adverbs and verbs? We all know that we use language to get our point across. So what is his point? I think there's 4 points. Every good preacher has 4 points. First one, check your attitude towards wealth. Check your attitude towards wealth. Verse 17, Paul says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So what Paul is simply saying there in verse 17 is meant to be a warning. It's meant to be a warning that helps us to check our attitudes regarding wealth. So think about your attitude regarding wealth. What Paul basically does is he instructs Timothy to warn the wealthy not to have an attitude that is either on the one hand prideful or on the other hand dependent on physical wealth. Instead, what we're called to be throughout the Scriptures is humble and dependent on our Father in heaven, who is the one that generously provides for us so that we can enjoy not just the gift that we've been given in riches, but to actually enjoy the giver of that gift himself. So it's basically a perspective check, right? Attitude towards wealth. The American way of life, for us, our culture, what we've been, I think, shaped by, at its core, I think, is capitalistic and materialistic, right? The consumption of material wealth for the advancement of the so-called good life is one of what I think is one of the most destructive core values of our nation. Money has a way of causing us to feel really important, or has a way of causing us to feel more secure, right? And the outcome of living with getting those desires for a sense of importance or a sense of security, getting those desires fulfilled by money, when that happens, what happens in our lives is that we begin to live with an attitude of in money we trust rather than in God we trust. Follow? So when something as limited as money becomes the almighty that we bow down to, then what happens is true, hope-filled joy gets stamped out by the pursuit of momentary happiness. Now, the reason for this is because what we're doing in those moments is we're trading down instead of trading up, right? We're trading the eternal joy that we could have in our Father in heaven, and we're trading that for the momentary happiness that we can find in something that is not eternal. That's the picture of what it looks like to trade down rather than to trade up. The invitation of this passage is to trade up. Is to trade up for the eternal joy that we could have in our Father rather than trading for things that are going to go away. To that same point, one author commenting on this passage, he says this. He says that enjoyment does not mean self-indulgent living. Enjoyment does not mean self-indulgent living. It means God-indulgent living. See, the gift of riches, the gift of wealth, those gifts are an expression of God's gracious generosity towards us. The gift of riches, the gift of wealth, it's not an invitation to self-indulge or to self-enjoy. Like I said a minute ago, the gift of riches, it's an invitation to find true and lasting joy in God, who is the giver of all good gifts. See, here's the thing. Your attitude towards wealth says a lot about your relationship with your Father in heaven. Your attitude towards wealth says a lot about your relationship with your Father in heaven. So what is your attitude towards wealth? Second point that I see in the text that I think Paul is trying to make is that we need to check our attitudes towards generosity. Check our attitudes towards generosity. In verse 18, Paul says that wealthy people are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. So here's the reality. The first thing that God wants from wealthy people is not their money. The first thing that God wants from wealthy people is a servant's heart. He values a servant's heart more than he values money. You might say it this way. You might say that active service should clothe every dollar we give away. The problem in the church today is not that there aren't enough Christians. The problem in the church today is that there aren't enough Christians who are Christ-like in their giving. You think about God, Father. If our attitude towards wealth and generosity says a lot about our relationship with our Father in heaven, but think about God for a minute and a correct view of who He is. Just one point quickly. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And He owns the hills too because He created them. Right? So God owns all the livestock and God owns all the real estate. That's how wealthy God is. Pretty stinking wealthy. And yet, God chose to give His one and only Son. I have one son. He gave His one and only Son to die on a cross for our sins. Our sins that usually take place with the things that God has created. Right? And He gave His only Son to die on that cross to pay the price for that sin so that we could then receive the richest life we could ever ask for all of eternity. You see, the quote-unquote best life now, it's not about getting earthly health and earthly wealth and earthly prosperity. Your best life now is about where you're going to spend eternity. That's why Paul says that he wants us to be rich in good works. Be generous and be ready to share. This is what it means to use our material gain for godliness instead of using godliness for material gain. So the Christian's life, if you're a Christian here, your life is to be marked by good works, generosity, and sharing with others in need. I believe that this kind of generosity, I believe that begins with the 10% tithe that we give to the church every time we get paid. And then I believe it extends out from there to the money that we give to support Christian missions. And then I believe it extends out from there, beyond that, to the money that we give away to people around us who are in need. As I've studied the Scriptures, that's the way I see that we are to practice generosity. So here's the way I like to say it oftentimes. I like to say it, the 10% tithe is basically training wheels on the bike of generosity. It's what trains us to be generous. And then missionary support that we give away, that's basically when we begin to ride that bicycle of generosity without training wheels. Okay? And then from there, when we begin to share with the poor, the picture of what is happening there is we're actually getting off the bicycle and we're selling that bicycle so that we can then share with the poor. So that's the three circles of generosity that I see in the Scriptures. We can't take all the time that I'd love to just nail that down. Be welcomed, to be good Berean-like people and test that out. I will say this, just from memory, not in my notes, but in support of what I've just said. If you look at Jesus, and I believe it's his preaching of the Sermon on the Mount, somewhere in the Beatitudes, I believe, somewhere in there, he basically says, hey, you've done really good in giving. You've done really good in praying, and so on and so forth. He doesn't chastise them for their giving, and he also doesn't say, stop doing that now. He says, you've done a good job. And so that, for me, in the New Testament kind of gives me, I think, the support for preaching a 10% tithe as training wheels and a giving generously to mission support, and then outside of that to the poor. There are some other places I think you can go to, but just argue that out for a minute. I think that's what generosity looks like. Here's the point, though. The point is this. Our giving of our wealth, it should be regular. It should be a regular basis. It should be proportionate to what we bring in. So when you think about this inside of a church family, you got somebody who makes $100,000 a year, and their tithe is what? Somebody give me the number because I'm bad with numbers. 10 grand a year, okay, that should be training wheels. And then you've got somebody who makes $10,000 a year, right? Then that 10% tithe should be what? 1,000? Okay. In that way, everyone pulls together. That's the proportionate side of things. So it should be regular. The way our family practices this is every time we get paid. The first fruits, meaning the first 10% of our paycheck goes to the Lord in our church. Starts there because we want to honor Him in our money that He's given to us. A lot of times we have a tendency to think, it's my money, I earned that. No, God gave you that because He gave you the talents to work the job that you have. And if He wants to take it away, He could, right? So I would rather have God bless the 90% than to have Him curse the entire 100%. Just principles that we've learned over the years. I will tell you that Christy and I, our family, this didn't come natural to us when we first started following the Lord. It took us a number of years to trust the Lord in this way. And yet God, in His grace, has done that work in us. So our giving, our generosity should be regular, should be proportionate. It should also be generous. There should be a generous sense to our giving, not stingy. And then finally, I think that our giving needs to be sacrificial. It should hurt a little bit when we are generous. Why? Because we serve a Savior who was generous enough to give His life on a cross for you and I, even though we didn't deserve it. So I think that in our generous giving, it should be sacrificial. And by doing so, what are we doing? We're modeling Jesus for a watching world. Right? What's your attitude towards generosity? Point 3, check your attitude regarding eternity. Verse 19, Paul says that wealthy Christians who live generously are actually storing up treasures for themselves. That's a good foundation for the future so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. The radical truth in this verse is that long-term financial security that is focused on this life is really worthless. Long-term financial security that is focused on this life is worthless. Why? Because death is the ultimate mode of that earthly security. Can't take your wealth with you, but you can definitely make a deposit in the next life that is absolutely secure. Paul's use of the phrase, if you go back to verse 17, you see his phrase where he says, the rich in this present age. So that phrase, in this present age, it's a reminder to us that there is a coming age, right? There's a coming age. And there's a kind of wealth in that coming age that is totally secure. So what is your attitude regarding eternity? How easy is it for you and I to slip into a trap of living only for earthly gain, only material consumption? See, the Christian who has a clear vision of eternity will live generously here on earth because that person is truly enjoying eternal life now, not just merely a good life now. What a freeing thing it is to think that way, to have that kind of a view of eternity, to be set free from the worship of the almighty dollar. See, here's the thing. Money makes a really bad god. Money makes a really bad master, and you can't serve both God and money. You can't. You can only serve one or the other. And money is a bad god, and it's a bad master. Here's the reason why. The promise of money doesn't last. It doesn't last. It never produces the lasting security or the lasting comfort or the lasting acceptance that it promises to produce. As soon as your money runs out, there goes your security. We all know what that's like, right? Most of us, I'm certain in this room, have experienced that. As soon as your bank account is dry, there goes what? Your comfort gone. dried up budgets don't attract a lot of friends. So the truly good life has absolutely nothing to do with health, wealth, and prosperity on this earth. Driving a truck, though I want one so bad, will not fill the hole in your heart that's caused by sin. It just won't. A full bank account will not heal the sickness of greed inside of you. A larger home will not fix your broken family. A larger home is only going to give you more corners to hide out from your broken family members. Sometimes that seems good, yes. So this is the problem of living with a distorted view of eternity, whereby we just focus on everything in this earth. So the invitation of this passage is to check our view of eternity. Check your view of eternity in light of your attitude towards wealth and generosity. So your attitude towards wealth and your attitude towards generosity, your practice of those things is informed by your view of eternity. The proper view of eternity will inform the way that I think about and behave and feel about my wealth and generosity. An eternal view will always remind me, an eternal view will always remind me that I cannot outgive the God who owns everything. I can't outgive Him. Regardless of how little I have or how much I have, I cannot outgive Him. And at the same time, He has promised that I will have all that I need. I may not have all that I want, but I will have all that I need. That has been His promise all throughout the Scripture. So, what is your attitude towards eternity? The thing that I see in this text is that we need to protect what's most important. We need to protect what's most important. Verses 20 through 21. Paul says, O Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, for by professing it some have swerved from the faith. Grace be with you. It's not that he's totally shifted direction here, although it would feel that way. That phrase, guard the deposit entrusted to you, you get a vision or a picture of pulling up at the bank window and dropping your deposit off, right? And you are entrusting that bank to take care of your money, right? You come back the next day to make a withdrawal and your money's not intact. What do you do? God has made a deposit in each of us if you are Christian. And that's what Paul is telling Timothy. He's telling him, protect what's most important. God's made a deposit in you. Timothy is literally a safe deposit box who's been entrusted with the gospel. Now, a trustee is literally obligated to preserve a deposit unharmed and unchanged. A Christian's obligation is not to innovate or to reinvent or to re-envision or to reinterpret the gospel. Instead, a Christian's obligation is to cherish and to guard and to defend the historic biblical gospel. But Charles Spurgeon said that where there are no historic doctrines of grace being preached, there is no historic biblical gospel being preached. How are you doing with protecting what's most important? How easy is it for you to get caught up in a sideline argument, what Paul calls irreverent babble, that fails to protect what's most important? It's too common. I've been on this for the last few weeks with us. Too common today for Christians to spout off over social media with all of their head knowledge that they have, while deep down inside their private lives are full of spiritual corruption. Spurgeon said it best this morning in my devotion, where he said, hey, these people are publicly saints in everything that they post. Click, 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 talk, 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 babble, babble. But in private, our lives are corrupt. Rampant sin running amok. It should not be this way. What does Paul say? Because these people were in Ephesus too. They were captured by their pursuit of what is falsely called knowledge. And the problem with this false knowledge that was in the church is that these men were lacing it with just a tiny little bit of truth. Or maybe it was a lot of truth with a tiny little bit of false. A little bit of cyanide in a really good drink kills you just the same. What does Paul tell Timothy to do? He tells him to avoid these people. Avoid them because they're swerving off the beaten path of gospel proclamation. So the historic gospel that Paul wants to preserve, the historic gospel that Spurgeon preached, the historic gospel that other faithful Christians have preached throughout the centuries, it's a message that reminds us that God created us to be with Him. That's how He created us. And then sin entered into the story. And that sin now is a barrier between us and God because He's perfect. And nothing imperfect can come into the presence of that which is perfect. Otherwise it gets eaten up. So our sin separates us from God. But thank you, God, for not leaving us there separate from all that is good, right? God Himself then sent His Son Jesus to pay the price. Why? Because our sin cannot be made right through all of our good works. You and I can never do enough good to make it right with God. Or God sent someone perfect, His very own Son, to pay the price for us. He paid the penalty, the purchase price. You get the connections today? Between the rich and the wealthy and the money and the deposits, all of that. He came to pay the price, the ransom for us. Why? So that we could trust in Him and be in relationship with Him. So how is your relationship with your Father in heaven? Because when Jesus died on that cross, He paid the price for your sin. And if you trust in Him, then what do you get? You get forgiveness and eternal life. It's a free gift that you get from Him. Here's what your sin does. When you sin, you get a paycheck for it. You work for something. And the paycheck for your sin is what? Death. Eternal separation from God. That's what you work for in your sin. But in salvation, you don't do anything to get something free. And the free thing you get is eternal life with your Father in heaven. It's the free thing that you and I get. That eternal life that we talk about, that forgiveness, something that doesn't just begin somewhere out in the future in heaven when I die here and go there. That eternal life that I receive by trusting in Jesus, it begins right now. It's a new life that I begin to live. Now I view my money, my relationships, my possessions, all of the things of this earth, like the scales have fallen off your eyes when this happens and you see differently. I once was blind, but now I see. Now you no longer live for the things of this earth. You now live in eternity. That's the picture of the gospel. Why would we ever want to talk about anything else? Everything else outside of the gospel is just merely coffee shop talk and social media banter. That's all it is. And it's worthless. And it doesn't save anybody. How are you doing at protecting what's most important? I want to take a bit to conclude. So, after those 4 points, Like we've learned that we need to check our attitude towards wealth, right? Check our attitude towards generosity, check it towards eternity. Need to protect what's most important. As I prayed through these this week, thought through these, I don't know about you, but I find that I fail in all these categories often. If you were hoping for a perfect preacher to stand in front of you and tell you how I knocked it out of the park, therefore you can go do the same thing, you need to find a different church. And when you find that church, you ought to leave that church because that pastor is lying to you. Jesus is the only one that could do this perfectly and preach it perfectly. That's the tension of preaching God's word. I fail in these categories often. I worry about money. I get stingy with money. I forget that there's more to my life than the things of this earth. I get caught up in little social fights. Doing gay. Why do I? To the Garden of Eden. And I think it goes back to the story of Israel too. Somewhere deep down inside of me, I still struggle with doubting who God is and doubting who God says I am. That's the core. Somehow I still believe that fruit, that really juicy looking fruit of worry, somehow that fruit of worry, that's going to satisfy me somehow, as if my worrying is actually going to add any dollars to my budget. I don't fully trust God. That's the confession, right? I don't fully trust God. I don't fully trust that He'll provide for me, and so I try to find security in being stingy with money instead of generous with money. I behave like Israel. In the midst of all of this, I place my hope in what I think I can control, rather than surrendering and placing my hope, goodness, loving kindness of my Father in heaven. Like Israel, I look around other families just as Israel would look around at other nations. Say, why don't I have what they have? What can I do the things that they're doing? They seem to be having a really good time. They seem to be really enjoying their wealth. I'm just like Israel in this. When I do this, I fail to protect what's most important, don't I? Because the message of the gospel is most important. And what happens in these moments when I struggle in this kind of sin is I begin to think that my earthly existence is wrapped up in all of the external things going on in my life. So when you think about this kind of confession of sin, causes grief inside of me, causes fear inside of me. Why? Because I know that sin brings dishonor to my Father. I don't want to dishonor my Father. It spreads like a disease in the deepest parts of my soul. And yet, at the same time, simultaneously, from somewhere deep within me, I'm reminded by the Spirit of God that this is the exact reason that Jesus came to this earth. He didn't come here for perfect people who aren't sick. Jesus' attitude towards wealth, his attitude towards generosity, they were founded on his perfect view of eternity. And all of that was illuminated by his relationship with his Father in heaven. When Satan tempted him with power, when Satan tempted Jesus with comfort, with security, with fortune, with fame, Jesus was able to resist the promise of those lies because he knew who and whose he was. Picture of Jesus. He was perfect. His identity was rooted in the truth. Deception didn't cause him to swerve off the road. Sin was no match for him. Satan couldn't conquer him. Jesus' purpose to live the perfect life in my place and then to die a sinner's death on my behalf. That was never in question for him. He never wavered from that. He never let up in his pursuit of offering his life as a ransom to pay the price for my sin. He looked at me. Back before he even created the foundations of the earth, before I was ever even a thought, he looked at me and he knew me intimately somehow. He didn't just know about me. He knew me. Psalm 139 gives a description of a God who is everywhere at all times for all time. There's nowhere that you and I can run where we could get away from his presence. You go to the deepest parts of the ocean, and God's presence is there. You go to the highest mountain, and God's presence is there. Even if you go down to your grave, God's presence is there. He's inescapable. You may not know that, you may not believe that, you may not trust that, but it's true. Back before the foundations of the earth, Jesus looked at me, and he looked at you if you've trusted in him. He looked at you if you sense that he's after you this morning. He looked at you, called you by name. He declared that you belong to him, that there is no place that you can run to. There's no place you can hide from him. There's no thing that you could ever do that could ever change his undying love for you. You see, the scriptures teach us that for the joy that was set before him, Jesus endured the cross for you and I, so that our adoption papers which declare us rescued from an orphanage of Satan, sin, and death, those adoption papers that declare that rescue would then be signed in Jesus' priceless shed blood. This is all wealth talk. Every one of us, at the end of the day, is hopelessly orphaned by our wrong attitudes towards wealth. We're hopelessly orphaned by our wrong attitude towards generosity. We're hopelessly orphaned away from God's presence by our attitude towards eternity, by our attitude towards the gospel. But the awesome news of the gospel is simply that Jesus' attitude towards all of those things enabled his generous sacrifice at the cross of Calvary, his victorious death, resurrection, gives him the credibility to promise that this life is not all there is to our existence. That's the promise of the resurrection. That this life is not all there is. In all of this, we have a promise, we have a hope of a future in eternity. It absolutely blows the doors off of any earthly pursuit we could follow. The wealth of eternity, the immeasurable generosity of my Father in heaven makes all the things of this earth look like a shabby, beat up, rusted out station wagon in comparison with the Cadillac of the gospel. Check your attitude towards wealth. Check your attitude towards generosity. Check your attitude towards eternity. Fight to protect what's most important, namely gospel. Amen? Let's pray. Father, I ask as we close that you would take the message of the gospel, apply it once again to our hearts, our minds, our lives. Father, remind us of your great, undying, faithful, steadfast, trustworthy love for us. Come now, I ask, minister to us, power of the Spirit as we close in song and communion. I trust you to do that work in Jesus' name, amen. As we close the same way every week. You guys hear this from me quite a bit. The reason is it's way too easy to hear a message and I get beat up a little bit. Man, I suck. I need to go out of this place and do better, which is not entirely completely incorrect either. There should be a change in our lives, right? And yet at the same time, we close with communion because we need to be reminded that in as much as we suck, and as much as sin has infected us, the broken body, shed blood of Jesus at the cross of Calvary is enough. And that's what actually changes, not your effort, but what he accomplished. So we always close by celebrating communion together. There's 4 stations, 3 at the front, 1 in the back underneath the big clock. And your left side, your right side, and the one in the back under the clock, there will be people at those 3 stations to pray with you and to serve you the communion elements. And the way we do is you just tear a piece off the loaf and you dip it in the juice, consume it, remembering the price Jesus paid. And at those 3 stations where there's people, those people would like to pray with you. You may be here, you might be like, I still don't know about this following Jesus thing. If you're not there yet, if you haven't trusted Christ with your life yet, you haven't surrendered that way, don't take the meal because it would just be a fake thing for you. Don't want you to do anything fake. Definitely you can come up and get prayed for. But maybe this is that moment. Maybe you heard something in the preaching of the gospel. God's Spirit spoke to you and said, today's the day when I'm opening your heart, I'm giving you a brand new heart, and you're understanding this message. Maybe today's that day where you heard that declaration of God over you and his love over you. That's you today. Come to one of those people that are serving and let them know that so they can pray for you and serve you your first communion as a Christian. Center station here is for those of you who would just like to do that between you and the Lord. That's totally between you and the Lord, and that's what the station is here. Love you guys a bunch. Let's stand and worship.
There's a place where mercy reigns, never dies. There's a place where streams of grace flow deep and wide. All the love I've ever found comes like a flood, comes flowing down. At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in awe of you. I'm in awe of you. Where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe all to Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power in us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. Refuse to waste our lives, for you're our joy and prize. To see the captives' hearts released, the hurt, the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We pray, revive this earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for much more than this. The hurt, the fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church. We are the hope on earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray.
All right, let's pray. Father, thank you so much that we can gather and worship you and not have to fear that persecution that other brothers and sisters around the world face. Thank you for speaking to our hearts and speaking through Joe. So just be with us as we go into this family meal today and fellowship and look at the way our church is going and where it's been the last 6 months. Just help people as they go about their week to, be mindful of their attitudes towards their sin and that we need to bring it to you. We just ask this in your name. Amen. All right, I'd like to invite everybody to stick around for our church gathering afterwards. We're going to be having some food. We got some drinks. And then we'll be discussing where we're at in the church with the different GCs and the budget and kind of what the vision of the next 6 months is going to be. So we'd love for you to stay. All right, thank you. Have a great week.